Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, What's New in CMMC and the Top 10 Not Met Controls. My name is Dave Hammarberg, partner at McKonly Asbury. I lead our SOC 2 High Trust CMMC area. I'm excited to get through this webinar and talk about CMMC. I have two colleagues with me. All three of us are CCAs, but I'll let them talk a little bit about their specific backgrounds. Elaine, would you like to talk?
My name is Elaine Nissley. I've been with the firm for 20 years. I've led up our internal audit practice and have now gotten involved in CMMC. I have a background in doing a NIST 853 assessments, so that was congruent with CMMC. We look forward to responding to any of your questions and providing some valuable information for you today.
And Mike.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Mike Murray. I'm a supervisor in the internal audit and CMMC segments. My background, I got started in human intelligence for the Army and DIA, transferred to the IT world, which really helped make it a fit when CMMC came about. Don't know if I mentioned I was with the firm for about 3 years, and I'm happy to be here.
Thank you, Mike. Yeah, you'll notice that we all have the CCA initial. That really is for the assessments, CMMC Certified Assessor. And we'll have, I think, a total of 8 CCAs this year through McKonly Asbury. So excited for that and excited for them to do the assessments. If you're not familiar with us, McKonly Asbury is an accounting and business advisory firm with offices in Camp Hill, Lancaster, Bloomsburg, and Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. We offer a wide range of services to organizations in various industries. For more information, please visit our website. One thing I do want to note is we're a C3PAO. We're one of the 34 C3PAOs that were authorized on January 2nd, 2025. We were excited to be one of the first, and we're excited about the CMMC journey and working with our clients to get them level 2 certified. Very exciting time. If you've joined us on past webinars, welcome back. If you haven't, our monthly webinars feature various business topics to keep you updated on what's going on around us. Be sure to check out our website to catch past presentations as well as current information through our blog. If you have any questions for us during today's presentation, please submit them through the built-in questions function in the webinar control panel, and we will do our best to answer them during or after the webinar. For those of you that are looking to obtain CPE credit for today's webinar, please keep in mind that there will be 4 polling questions throughout today's presentation. You must answer all 4 of those questions to get your certificate via email within a month after the webinar. In order for attendees to be eligible, you must answer via the polling submission. We will not accept late responses. Hopefully that was an easy question for most people. It looks like we got 93% yes. So here's the agenda for today. Again, most of the agenda for today goes around the 10 most failed security requirements, but we did start off by saying that, we were going to go over what's new in CMMC. The 3 of us, Elaine, Mike, and myself, are meeting with Cyber AB every Friday, and we go over what's new. And a lot of those what's new is what are the gray areas in the final rule that was passed in December of 2024. And it's more from an assessment standpoint. What's new from an OSA or organization seeking assessment standpoint would be Title 48. When is that going to get passed? Originally that was going to get passed in March of 2025. Then they said June of 2025. My thought is it's probably going to be 3rd, 4th quarter of this year. Once that passes, then I think you'll see a lot more organizations really frantic to get the level 2 certification. Once the Title 48 is passed, there'll be a year there where once 48 passes, it'll be 12 months until you actually see the requirement in the contracts. I think a lot of people are waiting for that to happen, and then sort of jump on it. One big thing that really is new is the level 2 certificates You can start doing the level 2 certification January 2nd of this year, but there was no one could get certified unless you had the certificate. And DoD just put out the certificate for CMMC level 2 last month. So we are seeing now level 2 companies that are actually level 2 certified. Anything to add to that, Elaine or Mike?
The only thing I would add is that, CMMC certification has been here, is recent, is current, but the self-assessments and meeting the SP 171 requirements is not new. And so I still encourage contractors to go ahead and implement level 2 certifications, at least do maybe a mock assessment to make sure that you're on the right track, so that when it does come around, you'll be in a good position to actually have the certification completed.
That's a good point. I mean, it's not something you can do in a month to get ready. We're talking about 110 control objectives and 320 requirements that need to be met in order to be level 2 certified. So it's a large task for any organization, really.
Yeah, and when we offer the mock assessment service, I mean, that gives you the opportunity to actually experience what you're going to go through during a certification assessment. And we pick out maybe the 10 most failed, or the areas where they're kind of gray areas for you and you'd like a little bit more of assurance that you're in the right direction. And we'll come in and we'll treat it just like an assessment. We'll say whether the security requirements meets or does not meet. But if it does not meet, we'll tell you exactly why it does not meet. We won't consult or give guidance, so we won't be conflicted from doing the certification assessment. But we'll give you enough information of why it does not meet so that you can understand where the issues lie.
And I'm not sure, we probably have a broad range of participants today. So in order to be levels 2 certified, you need a C3PAO, a third-party organization that is certified to do the level 2 assessments. And whatever C3PAO you go with, they're all going to offer the mock assessment. The Cyber AB, which is the governing body of the CCA certification, the CCP certification, CMMC, they really recommend that. And like Elaine said, it's sort of a preview of what you're going to see in those interview weeks, et cetera. I know to be a C3PAO, McKonly Asbury also had to go through the same assessment as we're doing for customers now. And I have to say that was it was the most stressful week of my life. It just was, 8 people just grilling us on security, access controls, you name it. They drilled it on it. Now we did great, but man, it was very stressful. So I think doing the mock assessment really is a preview of what to expect. And when you go through all these 320 requirements, there's going to be requirements in there, and you're like, man, this is where we're going to get caught up if we get caught up. And that is definitely the areas you want to do in the mock assessment. We've had clients do the whole 320 requirements, but then you're looking at a typical cost of the assessment. Doing it in a sort of a, the 10 most failed, or, the requirements that you aren't sure of, you can really lower the cost and get a better feeling of how you're going to do during the assessment. So we're going to jump into the 10 most failed security requirements, and I'm going to let Mike start this one off.
All right, thanks, Dave. We're going to be discussing some of the finer points of the 10 most failed security requirements. This list is based off of a list that was published by the Defense Contracts Management Agency, and it is the trouble requirements that they basically discovered during DIVCAC assessments. We're going to go through a lot of the examples and kind of talk our way around how some of them might be implemented or overcome. But it's going into this, it's important to note that NIST doesn't do a lot of hand-holding in general, and 800-171 is no different. So it is not a prescriptive requirement. And I'll point that out time and again as we get into some of these controls. In case you didn't know, NIST also published 800-171A, which contains a lot of examples to help an organization implement all 320 security requirements. However, it doesn't contain examples that are going to fit every single enterprise. So there might be some questions hanging going through that where you're really not sure of how it would apply to your organization.
Elaine, talk a little bit about auditor's judgment in regards to what Mike just said there.
Right. McKonly Asbury is an assessment organization. We made the decision that we were not going to be a consultant to help implement the requirements. We were going to stay in our sweet spot, which is an assessment. And, you know, when you're doing an assessment, we try to maintain independence and objectivity. We do not go in with preconceived ideas of how these controls should be implemented, because we recognize that there are 10 or 20 ways to do everything. And the important thing is that whatever you've put in place will meet the security requirement for your unique environment. So we come in with the idea that you need to prove to us that you've implemented these controls and it meets the security requirement and why it meets the security requirement. And as long as you can show that, then you're good. We're not going to push back and say, well, best practices says you should do this or spend all this additional money to get this other type of tool. It's about what works in your environment and what you're comfortable with and how you can actually articulate and verify how that your implementation meets the security requirement.
Thank you, Elaine. I do have a question here, and I apologize. We have so many acronyms, and the more we get into CMMC, it's just sort of natural for Mike and Elaine and I to just be like, oh, DCMA. C3PAO. A C3PAO is a certified third-party assessor organization. That's what that stands for. It's a good question. And while we're there, the DIBCAC, Defense Industrial Base Cybersecurity Assessment Center. So when you, like I said before, when you're getting assessed by DIBCAC, it's stressful. I imagine, I've never been audited by the IRS. I don't want to be, but I imagine it's like getting 8 IRS auditors and you around a board table. Not the best thing.
Okay, and we're going to dive right in and go straight down the list as it was presented by DCMA. This first one is one of 2 oddball controls where the score can either be a 3, a 5, or of course a 0 if you don't pass it. So what is FIPS validated cryptography and why is it important? FIPS is Federal Information Processing Standard, and you'll see on the following slide there is a link to a list of FIPS validated modules. The good thing, one of the good things to know about this control, how can it be a 3 or a 5? So if you have cryptography in place that is protecting anything to do with CUI, but it is not FIPS validated, that is going to be scored a 3. And of course, if you do have FIPS validated cryptography, that's how you reach a 5. Now, NIST performs the validation of the FIPS modules, but they also perform validation for the algorithms, which is some of the underlying algorithms that make up the larger module. So it's important to note the difference between the two and ensure that when you're implementing FIPS cryptography that you are using a validated module. Let's see.
And Mike, you know, I think what gets people here a little bit is the algorithm versus the encryption?
Yes. So to note the difference, it can get fairly confusing pretty fast, but the algorithms are the way I understand it is the underlying technology, if you could look at it that way, that make up the module itself. So a module can contain one or more of the algorithms, and the module is tested with very specific hardware and software configurations. And that's why it's important to make sure that when you're going through the list of FIPS validated modules, that there is a good match between exactly what NIST validated in their testing.
Right, so you could have a OSA that has a FIPS validated algorithm, but doesn't have the module, and then they would be not met, correct?
That would be correct.
So I've heard of it like this. You can have FIPS validated algorithms that are the ingredients. The FIPS validated module is the completed meal. So you really need that module and then the validated algorithm as well. And that's fairly easy to find. If you're using Cisco devices or any of the brand name stuff, that's easy to find whether or not you're using the FIPS validated module. And the other thing is I found a problem is, a device may be able to do FIPS and the client doesn't use it. Just having, you have to make sure you're actually using it. And you're going to have to prove that to the assessor as well.
And another good note about this control is that the FIPS validated cryptography only has to be used in the areas where it is protecting CUI. So if there's another part of your enterprise where CUI isn't it's not being used or transmitted, processed, any of that, then you don't need FIPS validated cryptography.
And I think there's another couple points to this as well. When we talk about the 3 or the 5 points, within CMMC, there's 120 control objectives. And each one of those, if it meets all the requirements, gets a score of 1. If it does not meet the requirements, then there's a number subtracted from the score. So in this particular case, if you would implement cryptography, but it's not FIPS validated, you would have 3 subtracted from your score. And you would have, this is one of the rare cases where a 3 or a 5 control objective point level can be a plan of action and milestone. So you can pass your assessment with a score of -3 for the FIPS validated cryptography. And then it can go into a plan of action and milestone, and you have 6 months then to correct that. The other point I want to say is that they've had, OSCs have had issues with the validation, the FIPS validation of the cryptography, not keeping up with the current version of the software. And so you don't want to stop upgrading your software to the current version. So what you can do, as long as your prior version was FIPS validated, even if the upgraded and current version is not, you will still pass.
Those are great points, Elaine. Sorry about that.
All right, and the second control we're going to get into is multi-factor authentication. Just like the control before, this one can be a 3 or a 5, and I'll get into how you can achieve either of those scores in a moment. So I'm going to try to avoid reading the exact control objectives, but basically what the spirit of this control is you know where your privileged administrator accounts are, and that counts for both network and enterprise administrators and any local administrator accounts that you have set up on any devices. To earn a 5 on this, MFA basically has to be implemented across the board. So non-privileged and privileged users, whether they're network admin or local admin. To earn a 3, that would mean that you have a partial implementation. So you have your network administrators and local administrators on MFA, but the non-privileged CUI users don't have MFA. In that case, you would score a 3. And like the control before, this one is eligible for plan of action and milestone. Is that correct, Elaine? I want to make sure.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
Okay. And going through this, we got a question a while back when we did another presentation about having trouble with MFA in facilities where maybe you can't have a mobile device. So just to break it down, MFA requires at least 2 of the following. It has to be something you know, like a password, something you have. For most people, that's a cell phone with MFA app on it, or something you are. So that's biometric verification, whether that's like Face ID, fingerprint. And in those cases where you cannot have a mobile device, or for whatever reason, you can have a security token, whether that's a badge or a dongle, that is uniquely traceable back to a particular user. So it can't be, in other words, like a badge just hanging up in the office that anyone who has to log on gets to use. It still has to be traceable to an individual.
Mike, that's great to point out. I mean, there's so many different ways to meet a lot of these different requirements. And when we say requirements, we're talking about A through D. We're talking about controls. We're talking about the actual multi-factor authentication. You need to be met on all A, B, C, and D to be met on this control. But again, you need an auditor that has done a ton of assessments in order to feel good about your chances of passing to level 2, because there's a lot of different ways you can do that.
Okay, moving into the third control, identify, report, and correct.
Hey, Mike, before we move on, we do have a question. Is there a clear definition of what a privileged account is? With fine-grained control systems, I'm not sure I understand how to identify privilege, since every active account has some level of privilege. And I believe the privilege that they're talking about is privileged in regards to doing something related to security. So whether it be, any kind of management of a security protection asset or security settings. That's, Mike, is there anything additional to that?
Yeah, and as it pertains to being able to provision accounts or change the rights of other accounts.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there, Mike. And I think, if there is some gray area in your organization where you can't figure out what a privileged account is and what non-privileged account is, I think you need to define that in your SSP and say, hey, these are my privileged accounts. I consider these privileged accounts. Because again, the assessment is going to first start with your SSP, and we're going to read through that. And really, you need to define all of that in your SSP. I like Mike's answer, but I think if you are worried about something like that, you have to really document the heck out of it in the SSP.
Yeah, and again, this is a good place to point out that NIST isn't prescriptive. It doesn't say exactly what a privileged account is. Okay.
Mike, you want to go on to the next one?
Yes. Identify, report, and correct system flaws. So this one as well, you're going to see that the words that I'd like to key in on are the identify and specified, especially as it pertains to the time frame. This is one where it's up to the organization to kind of define these parameters, whatever you deem acceptable for system flaws, as it pertains to like any vulnerability scans that you might have, or system flaws that were identified in another way. This is sometimes confused with periodically assessing risk, the following controls. So to kind of differentiate the two, these are like the fine-grained vulnerabilities that are going to pop up for any vulnerability scans, and they kind of feed into the overall risk assessment, which I'm kind of getting ahead of myself. That's on the next slide, but it is important to differentiate. If during your assessment you're asked to produce a vulnerability, or a risk assessment that was reviewed and passed, and you hands a vulnerability scan, that's not going to make it. Dave, Elaine, do you have anything to add?
Yeah,
I think.
Go ahead, Dave.
I think passing 3.14.1 requires at a minimum a vulnerability scanner and a patch management strategy. And both of those, it's going to be a process, tools, personnel, and it really requires you to define what is a timely matter. And, again, you've got to look at all 6 of those requirements to meet that control. Elaine?
Yes, I was going to say, if you notice, all 6 of them have time in it. And again, like Mike said, CMMC is not prescriptive. So the important thing is, if you say in your policies, procedures, your SSP, that something is going to be done every day, then you need to make sure that you have evidence that shows it was done based upon what you wrote down as your time period.
That's right. And I think as you go through the assessment, you're going to have to show that. And so you just have to make sure for all those 320 objectives, you won't have to show every single one, but you don't know which ones the assessor is going to ask about. So you have to be prepared to do some, to have some shoulder surfing done and show configurations, etc. So just remember that. And we're moving into our second polling question. Pertaining to L2-3.13.11, FIPS validated cryptography. If an OSA employs cryptography but is not FIPS validated, it scores. And we'll give some time here, probably about 45 seconds for you to answer the question. And again, remember, you have to answer all 4 to get CPE. All right, here we go. We got the answers. Elaine, do you want to give the good news to someone, bad news to others?
Okay. So if it's not FIPS validated, it's scored as a 5. We only had 6% that got the score, which is correct, the correct score. We had 57% that was at a 3. And again, you get a 3 when you have Well, I'm sorry. You're right. 57% is right. I'm wrong. So
Yeah,
the 3 points, there you are. Sorry.
I was like, how am I going to correct this?
Yeah,
Go ahead,
you
Elaine.
correct me here. Sorry. You're right. If it's 3 points, if it's employed but not FIPS validated. And so we had 57% got that correct. We had 6% had 5, 11% had 1, and 26% had 0. And the 0 actually is equivalent to the 1 point because you don't have any negative points, but you do get 1 positive point.
Yeah, the scoring's a little wacky on here. I think you got to remember, you got to get 110, and you have to have 88 before your poems. So you really need to meet all of these. So scoring is what it is, but really at the end of the day, you need to meet everything. And moving to the next one.
All right, so periodically assess risk. Again, I'm going to keep pointing this out. There is no prescribed time frame in which an OSA must assess risk, but I want to key in on the keywords in security requirement A. The first 2 and the last 2 words are the most important. So frequency is defined. So that is up to the OSA, whatever they deem to be acceptable for their risk assessments. And then part B is the OSA carrying out the risk assessments on time? And of course, you'd be asked to produce evidence of that, that a risk assessment is being performed in accordance with what is defined in your SSP. Again, the SSP is the golden document where all of this should be documented, how you're meeting this. All right, next, I did kind of touch on this, vulnerability scanning in organizational systems and applications periodically, and when new vulnerabilities affecting systems and applications are identified. So again, the first 2 and the last 2 words in these security requirements, well, at least A, C, and E are quite important. So you are specifying, you as the OSA are specifying the timeframes for identifying system flaws, reporting them, and correcting them. And this should all be documented in your SSP. And of course, B and D, you should be able to produce evidence that you are in fact carrying these vulnerability scans out. And again, to differentiate this from assessing risk, vulnerability scanning should be a part of your overall risk management and not relied on as your risk assessment.
Makes sense, Mike. I mean, to really fulfill this requirement, you have to have a vulnerability management program. And it's got to be capable of scanning and detecting vulnerabilities. And those can be done through automated, pre-scheduled, or ad hoc, or manual on-demand scans. But remember, you need to show proof of this. You need to document the SSP. That's good. That SSP is going to be the Bible for your CMMC. I should be able to go to your SSP and see how all of those controls are fulfilled, and see a pathway to the evidence. When I say a pathway, a link or some kind of evidence there in the SSP. That's really what I'm looking for.
Yeah, and this again is one of those that has time in every one of the security requirements here. And again, it's very important that whatever you document as a time frame is what you have implemented. But the good thing is with the final rule, they have this opportunity for reevaluation. So if you happen to say in your SSP that you do it every day, but you've determined and you're only doing it weekly, that's one of those cases where we would allow you to go back and change your time frame to weekly to be consistent with what you have implemented. And then after the reevaluation, then you could be met.
Yeah, I mean, our goal is not to see how many people can fail this. We want to see people succeed here. So with that final rule, like Elaine said, that you have 10 days, 10-day window to correct certain minor flaws. And there's some limitations on that they don't affect other controls, et cetera. But it does open the door for organizations that may have a little slip up here and there to easily correct them and continue on. Good note to make, Elaine.
Mm-hmm.
All right, moving on to the next one, review and update logged events. So again, this is another one where the power is being given to the OSA to define the process for when to review logged events. So that could be a monthly, it could be weekly or quarterly, as long as it's documented in your SSP. Part B, the event types being logged are reviewed in accordance with the defined review process. So basically you tell us, or you're saying what and when you're going to do the review, and then you're carrying out the review the way that you said you would. And part C is important. The event types being logged are updated based on the review. So the event types, your list of event types that you are reviewing should be a living list and should be kind of aligned with the threat landscape, which of course is always changing. So if there is a really big exploit out in the wilds and you can detect it by, finding certain events that are happening in your enterprise, then that should be based upon the review.
Yeah. And Mike, I think that's a good point, because really the intent of this is to make sure that you don't have a static logging process, that you're actually keeping it up to date and keeping up with the current threat environment, because if you're not, then you're really opening yourself up to risks.
Yeah, and then to continue on there, I mean, to pass this requirement, you're going to have to correctly categorize your information systems. And you really need to define the audit records necessary to support cyber incidents investigation. You have a lot of logs, but which ones support cyber incidents investigation? And again, you need to document that in the SSP. And I think, I think a lot of people fail this because everyone has security logs, but what do you do with them? Which ones are you looking at? How do you correlate them, et cetera? Anything to add there, Mike?
No, I think we sized that one up pretty well.
Polling question number 3 pertains RAL 2-3.11.1, periodically assess risk. CMMC requires an organization-wide risk assessment every 60 days. My staff probably doesn't like when I just put them on the spot, which I did to Elaine on the last one. So I'm going to give Mike a heads up that he is going to answer this.
Fair enough. I'm ready.
Hey, I was ready for this one. I'm better on this one.
Sorry, Elaine. And we had one individual emailed me, said they didn't have enough time on the last one. So please make sure you answer these. We have probably about 45 seconds. And again, we have to answer all of the quick polls.
And we do have another question out there as well that we'll address here after we finish up the poll.
Sounds good. All right, Mike.
All right, the answer here, and this is kind of what I've been harping on the whole presentation, is it is false. It does not prescribe any specific time frame, and it is entirely up to the OSA how frequently they will perform a risk assessment.
Yeah, now if we go into the assessment and the person's like, hey, we do a risk assessment every 635 days, that's going to be an issue. But whether it's 60 days or 120 days or, that's really not going to be an issue as long as the SSP matches the evidence and the documentation of what's actually going on. Elaine, do you want to, I'll put you on the spot again and answer the question coming in?
So it says, what metrics should we track to demonstrate the effectiveness of our log review process? And evidence that you've actually reviewed. So not just having a meeting and having a discussion, but document the results of that discussion. So, and what your inputs were, where did you obtain information on threats, and how did you make your decisions related to updating the logs?
And I would add to that, I think you have to define which logs, again, are necessary for you to fulfill this control objective. So what supports cyber incidents investigation? Does that go into a SIM? How do you correlate? And then what do you do? How do they get alerted? Where does it go into a help desk ticket, and then it gets, as Elaine said, does it then get documented that it's been mitigated, whether that's a false positive or something else? But again, it's going to be different for each organization based on what they have. If you're in the cloud, you're on-prem, a hybrid situation, et cetera. So it's going to be different. But again, as just like this 60 days, it's really up to you, SOA, to decide what it is. And again, this is a good way, a good mock control objective, just because you can see if you're on the same level as your C3PAO. If the C3PAO says not met, obviously they want more. But again, I think if you think about it and you document in your SSP, you should be fine. But again, how do you, what logs are necessary to support cyber incidents and investigation? Anything to add there, Mike?
Yeah, I was going to say, just keeping track. I mean, the logs, everything's set to log these events, whatever your settings are, and however often you go in and do your reviews based upon our review, this is our new settings. So even just showing that comparison, and then you proactively made changes to what you were logging, what you were looking at.
Right, and logging goes through there. There's a ton of controls around logging. So you really have to think about how you log, have a system. I don't know how you would do logging without a SIM. There's just too many logs. How you correlate, how you respond to them, how you're alerted, how you're notified if the system's not working. We'll get into a control pertaining to that in the future here. But you really need a comprehensive logging, not only for this control, but for other controls in the CMMC area.
And this is a good example to kind of discuss what Dave was just talking about. This audit logging process failure alerts. This one really does rely on having a SIM or even a endpoint detection and response, like maybe a Sentinel-1 implemented. So an example of this is you have an asset that should be reporting in every hour, and you have not heard from that asset, or the SIM has not heard from that asset in 5 hours, then who is being alerted for that? So to kind of go down the list here, what you need to have done is identify who is going to be alerted in the case of an audit logging process failure, what types of process failures are generating the alerts, and part C, showing evidence that that A and B together are effective. And it may be that you have the personnel identified in your SSP of who is receiving these alerts. You have the alert set up in your SIM and can demonstrate that, but you haven't had any audit logging process failures. You can still meet Part C because in this case, negative evidence still serves as evidence if the first two are correctly implemented. And again, this control is best met with having a SIM or endpoint detection response in place. Audit record review, analysis, and reporting processes for investigation and response to indications of unlawful, unauthorized, suspicious, or basically bad activity. So you have to define the process, and that should be defined in your SSP. And the second part of this, defined audit record review, analysis, and reporting processes are correlated. So again, it's telling you that you need a SIM without directly telling you that you need a SIM.
Right, and I think the more we get into these and the more you guys get into the 320 requirements, you'll see that they're all entangled, right? So one of the reasons why you cannot use the 10 days to correct something is if it affects another control being met. So logging is an area where you really need to get it right the first time around. And you could look at one logging requirement and be like, all right, I got that, but there's 10 other ones throughout the 320 objectives that you really need to make sure you have a comprehensive plan. And as like Mike said, if you call it a SIM or a SEAM or whatever you call it, you need one in order to get by and to show evidence that you're doing these things.
All right, number 9, test incident response capability. This one is one of the simpler ones. There's only one part. Determine if the incident response capability is tested. So there's a variety of ways that an OSA can test their incident response. Again, not prescriptive. It's not telling you exactly how to do it, but a lot of the common tests include walkthroughs, tabletop exercises, which that's the one we probably see the most, simulations to cover any number of scenarios that, as an organization you've defined constitutes a incident.
Yeah, I mean, for the last 20 years of doing SOC 2 and high trust assessments, this is an area that, really people just don't do. When they're a new client, they might have an incident response policy, but it's not tested. They don't do tabletop exercises, et cetera. And, and really anyone who's gone through a tabletop exercise knows that you learn a ton from that. And it also changes the document. That document is a living document that just continues to morph into a more comprehensive document. And without that testing, you're left with this shell of document that you don't know if it's going to work. And I would, I don't have a poll, but I would gather probably 80–90% on the call don't test their incident response capability. And I think that is a huge issue, but this should be fairly easy to do in your organization and to prove. We just need to make sure it's done.
All right, finally, number 10, establish and maintain baseline configurations. This control is really combining two different things. So there's system inventory and baseline configurations for that. So it's best to read this control kind of holistically by its security requirements rather than going down the list trying to meet this. So the system inventory should include hardware, software, firmware, and documentation for all of those items. And to go along with that, a baseline configuration should be established for those same items in accordance with the system development lifecycle. How frequently is the baseline configuration being reviewed, updated? A lot of, there's several security-oriented organizations out there that offer industry standard baseline configurations. Like, for example, we follow the CIS, Center for Internet Security configurations. And if you can show that you are using or borrowing those baselines and maintaining them and updating them as they kind of come down the pipe, that could be kind of a ready-made solution for this control, depending on your environment, of course. And go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, I think this one, the reason why it fails is a lot of people just don't do it. When I was IT director, you just break a ton of stuff when you're doing baseline configurations, whether that's server baselines, Windows machine baselines, but it's imperative to have those baselines on workstations. Just from a malware, ransomware situation, people can't run stuff. This is a painful area if you don't do it to get implemented. But again, once you're there, it's a beautiful thing. But I think the initial pain is the reason why this doesn't get done. And again, you want baselines for anything that's included in your in your network diagram. So that is in your CUI. So anything that process, transmit, or receive. Process, transmit, or store CUI. So CUI assets, they include routers, firewalls. You should have benchmarks for all of those, and it's a large task.
And having a golden image, a lot of IT shops have like a golden image that they use for servers and endpoints, laptops. Being able to produce that golden image and show that it is in line with whichever baseline that you've established or configured is a way to knock out a chunk of this security, or a chunk of this control, but it by no means would kind of satisfy all of that.
Yeah, and I think another challenge of this control is just keeping that system inventory up to date, because it's not just do it once a year or something like that. It's a continual changing living document.
Thank you, Mike. We're going into our last, or thank you, Elaine and Mike. Going to our last polling question. Pertaining to IR.L2-3.6.3, test incident response capability. An OSA can use which method to test incident response capability? And Elaine, it's going to be back to you. So
I'm ready.
And again, we need everyone to answer this if they want CPE. And if you have any final questions, I know we probably have a minute or two. Please submit those. Again, this will be our last polling question. And yep.
Okay, tabletop exercise is the correct answer. We have 63%. Penetration testing is 19%, and vulnerability scanning is 19%. And tabletop exercises, when you look at incident response, probably the biggest challenge in incident response is communication. And tabletop exercises give you the opportunity to practice that communication, to become second nature, is to know who and when you should call somebody and have a discussion. So again, tabletop exercise is the correct answer here.
And I think as you go through, this is not easy. And if you're an organization, small, medium, large, sometimes you need another organization to help you through this. If you're looking for suggestions for that, please reach out to me. Again, we can't do that because from an independent standpoint, we can only do the assessments, but make sure you pick the right individuals. There's a lot of people out there saying they can help you. And a lot of times, you know, when you find a organization that's also a C3PAO can consult and do an assessment, but not for the same organization. So if you find that a C3PAO that can do consulting, you can't use them for assessment, but that would be a good organization to use for consulting, in my opinion. And questions, we have answered the questions as we went. Again, here is our contact information. Feel free to reach out to any of us with questions. Again, we can answer general questions. We'll be limited on the consulting if it's very you know, in particular to your organization, but we will do the best we can.
And we do have some trusted partners we work with too, right, Dave, that we can make some referrals if they have specific issues.
That's right. That's right. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. If you have any further questions regarding today's presentation, please feel to reach out. Our team would be happy to assist. A recording of today's presentation will be posted on our website and social media sites in a few days. And for those of you who requested CPD and answered the polling questions, those certificates will be sent out within the next month. Upcoming events. May 8th webinar. Registration is open for our next webinar, The Essentials of SOC 1, All You Need to Know, which will be taking place on May 8th and will provide attendees with an overview and basic understanding of SOC 1 reporting. May 29th webinar. You can also save your seat for our webinar on May 29th, where our manufacturing team will be joined by Cargill Systems to help explain the value of modern enterprise resource planning system, or ERP system, and give you a full picture of the implementation of the software. And another event that's coming up that we don't exactly have dates for is we will be doing, I think it's going to be a 3-part ManTech series on CMMC. We did that in early, I believe, February, and that went really well. It's an area where the Cyber AB allows us to do, I would say it's consulting, but if we're in a group setting, we can really talk particulars. So it's a nice area where it's usually not a huge group, but we can go back and forth and it's a conversation. And that's really how those 3 events went in February. I think we're going to try to reproduce those in June. So keep a lookout for that. Those dates should be coming and emails. And thanks again for joining us and enjoy the rest of your day.